Terrence Cole was 38 years old, a regional logistics operations manager who had spent 11 years building systems that worked so well nobody thought about them. That was, in his experience, the definition of good work, the moment it becomes invisible. The trucks that arrived on time. The inventory that was where it was supposed to be. The supply chain that didn't make the news because it didn't break. 11 years of invisible, correct work, and he had been fine with that arrangement until the Tuesday in March when his wife Diane sat across from him at their kitchen table and told him she was leaving. She was not vague about why. He drove a 5-year-old Camry he kept clean and maintained himself. He had a habit, every Sunday morning, of sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a yellow notepad, going through the week ahead. Not a to-do list exactly, more like a load assessment. What's coming, what it requires, what the sequence needs to be. He had done this for so long it had stopped feeling like planning, and had started feeling like the way he breathed. He was not a man who was surprised by complexity. He was a man who was surprised by Diane. He had no idea, when she left, that the man she was leaving him for had already begun doing the thing Terrence had flagged in a professional report 16 months earlier, quietly, to a client who hadn't listened, as the single most reliable way to destroy a consumer brand in under 2 years. She called him 200 times before he picked up. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The kitchen smelled like the coffee she had made and not touched. That was the detail Terrence would remember later, not what she said first, not the folder of documents she had prepared, but the full cup of coffee going cold on the counter behind her while she talked, because she had made it by habit and then forgotten it existed the moment the conversation started. Diane had prepared. He could see that. The way she held herself across the table had a rehearsed quality, not cold, exactly, but settled. Like someone who had run this conversation in their head enough times that the live version felt like a formality. "I've been honest with myself about what I need," she said. "And I haven't been honest with you, and that's not fair to either of us." Terrence looked at her. "I love you," she said. "I want you to know that. But I need more than this." "More than?" She paused, and her hand moved briefly in a gesture that seemed to indicate the kitchen, the house, the life, all of it, more than what we've been building. He said, "What are you building toward?" It came out flat, not hostile. He genuinely wanted to know. In the same way he wanted to know the destination whenever someone changed a route. Diane looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression shifted. The rehearsed quality gave way briefly to something that was not quite guilt and not quite apology. "His name is Garrett Spice," she said. "He runs a consumer brand. It's growing fast." She paused. He's at a different level, Terrence. That's the honest answer." Terrence nodded slowly. He looked at the coffee cup behind her. He looked at the yellow notepad on the counter, where Sunday's list was still written out. The week already half executed. He didn't throw anything. He didn't ask how long or how far or any of the questions people ask when they want to build a case. He had spent 11 years in logistics. He understood that when a system was already rerouted, reviewing the original plan served no operational purpose. "Okay," he said. Diane blinked. "Okay, I'll need a few days to figure out the practical side." She had prepared for a different kind of conversation. He could see her recalibrating. Yes, of course, we can work through everything. I'll stay at my brother's while we figure out the house." He stood. He picked up his notepad from the counter. He picked up his coffee. He did not pick up her cup. He noticed, in the filing place where he put things he wasn't done with yet, that she had said growing fast. Not profitable. Not solid. Fast. He filed it. He walked out of the kitchen. What Terrence had built in their 6 years of marriage was not the kind of thing that showed up in a photograph. 3 years before Diane left, he had taken on a consulting project for a regional food distribution company that was hemorrhaging money because its routing logic was built on assumptions that hadn't been updated since 2014. He had spent 4 months rebuilding the system from the route level up. When he finished, the company's delivery costs dropped 23%. The owner had written him a check for $12,000 and asked if he did this kind of thing regularly. He had said he did it for one company, meaning his employer. The owner had said, "Think about doing it for more." He had thought about it. He had thought about it seriously, on Sunday mornings with a notepad, in the way he thought about load assessments, carefully, in sequence, without moving to the next step until the current one was structurally sound. He had spent the following year building the foundation of what he was not yet calling a company. 2 more consulting clients, both through referrals, both paid, both handled on evenings and weekends without fanfare. He had not told Diane about these clients. Not because he was hiding them, because he was still in the verification stage, and he did not put walls up before the foundation was set. By the time Diane sat across from him at the kitchen table, CPL Logistics Consulting had 3 active clients, a registered LLC, and a pipeline of 2 more referrals that his former supervisor had passed along the previous month. Diane left without knowing any of this existed. She also left without knowing that Terrence had written a report 16 months earlier for a distribution client that supplied several consumer goods brands, in which he had identified a specific class of over-leveraged brand structures, fast-growing consumer companies that had scaled their marketing spend ahead of their operational infrastructure, and had described, with the specificity his work always carried, exactly how and why they collapsed. The report had been well received. The client had thanked him. The brand his client distributed for? One of Garrett Spice's suppliers. Terrence had not connected the name at the time. There had been no reason to. He connected it 4 weeks after, when he was reviewing his old consulting files and saw the supplier list. He looked at the name for a long moment. He pulled the report. He read the section on operational infrastructure. He set the report down. He picked up his coffee. He did not say anything to anyone. He filed it in the place where he put things he was not yet done with, and he went back to work. Her name was Vivian Cross. She had spent 29 years as a regional logistics director for a national distribution company before she retired to a house on the east side and a garden she tended with the same methodical attention she had given to freight routes and vendor contracts. She was 64 years old, compact and direct, with reading glasses she wore on a chain and a habit of asking the second question before most people had finished answering the first. She had hired Terrence 11 years ago as a mid-level operations analyst, watched him rebuild 2 routing systems from scratch inside 18 months, and spent the next decade telling anyone who would listen that he was the best operational mind she had managed in her career. She had also, in the private accounting she kept of the people she cared about, watched his marriage with the particular attention of someone who understood load-bearing structures and could see. For about 3 years before the weight was being distributed incorrectly, she had not said anything, because he hadn't asked, and because she understood that there was a time for information and a time for silence, and that offering the first at the wrong moment destroyed both. He called her 4 days after Diane left. It was a Wednesday morning. She picked up before the second ring. "Come to the house. I'll make food." He came. She made food. He talked through the logistics of the separation, the house, the finances, the practical sequence of it. She listened without interrupting until he was done. Then she put a folder on the table. "I've been doing some reading," she said. "Eat first." He ate. Then he opened the folder. The first item was a trade publication piece from 8 months ago about Spice Consumer Group, Garrett Spice's company. The piece was enthusiastic. New product lines, aggressive retail expansion, a Series B funding round of $14 million, a photograph of Garrett Spice in a warehouse that had clearly been staged for the photograph, in clothes that had clearly been selected for the photograph, with the posture of a man performing operational competence for an audience. Terrence looked at the photograph for a moment. "There's more," Vivian said. The second item was a vendor payment report, not confidential, pulled from a supplier network database that tracked commercial payment patterns. Spice Consumer Group had been running 60 to 90 days late on vendor payments for the past 2 quarters. Not catastrophically late, just late enough to be a pattern for someone who knew what the pattern meant. The third item was a lease filing, a new headquarters space, signed 8 months ago, a 12,000 square foot commercial lease at a rate that Vivian had highlighted in yellow, represented approximately 34% of the company's projected monthly revenue based on the Series B documentation. Terrence looked at the 3 items on the table. He stood over them the way he stood over a routing map, not reading each piece separately, but looking at the whole shape of the system. The marketing spend, the lease commitment, the vendor payment delays, the expansion into new product lines before the operational infrastructure could carry them. He had written this report. He had described this exact sequence. He had used the phrase "the gap between growth narrative and operational reality" in the 3rd paragraph. "How long?" he said. Vivian considered it. She was not a person who gave estimates casually. At this burn rate, with this vendor exposure? 18 months to a serious contraction. Maybe less if the retail expansion underperforms. Terrence nodded. He folded the trade piece and put it back in the folder. "What do you want to do?" Vivian asked. "Nothing," he said. "I want to do nothing about this." She looked at him. "I mean that correctly," he said. "I don't need to do anything about it. It'll do what it does. I just needed to see the shape of it." He paused. "I need to focus on the work." Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across and refilled his coffee. "I have a referral for you," she said. "A cold chain operation in the valley. They've been losing 8% to spoilage because their routing assumptions were built for a different fuel cost environment." She slid a business card across the table. "I told them you were the right person." He picked up the card. "The work," she said, "is what it always was." He didn't move fast. He moved the way he always moved, in correct sequence, one foundation layer at a time, without announcing what was being built, until it was built. That was the thing Diane had never been able to account for. She had spent 6 years forming an opinion about the kind of man Terrence was, and the opinion she had arrived at was steady, reliable, careful, but not the kind of careful that produces something large, the kind that maintains something modest. She had been right about the first 3, and specifically, precisely wrong about the last one, because she had confused the pace of his building for the scale of it. The cold chain referral became a 6-month engagement. Terrence drove out to the facility on a Tuesday, walked every route, spent 40 minutes with the operations supervisor going through the spoilage logs the way another person might read a story. For sequence, for pattern, for the place where something diverged from what it was supposed to be. He found it in the routing assumptions. The fuel cost modeling had been built in 2017 and never updated. Every route calculation since had been optimized for a cost environment that no longer existed. which meant the trucks were running the cheapest-looking routes, rather than the actually cheap, and the gap was showing up as spoilage because the longer transit times no one was tracking were degrading temperature-sensitive product by fractions that compounded daily. "Why hasn't anyone caught this before?" the operations manager asked. "Because it didn't fail all at once," Terrence said. "It failed at 2% a week for 4 years. That looks like noise until you measure it correctly." He rebuilt the routing model in 6 weeks. The engagement produced a restructure that cut spoilage from 8% to 3%, and saved the client $340,000 in the first operational year. The client referred him to 2 other regional operators. Vivian sent him a 4th. By the end of his first full year of independent operation, CPL Logistics Consulting had 7 active contracts, 3 employees, and a revenue figure that Terrence had written in the corner of a Sunday notepad page and looked at for a moment before writing the next week's load assessment next to it. His name was on every deliverable, every report. Every proposal carried his analysis, his methodology, his stamp. There was no letterhead, there was no presentation he authored that someone else delivered. He answered every call the same day. The house on Garfield went through the divorce settlement without complication. Diane took the furniture she had chosen, and the car that had been primarily hers. Terrence kept the house, because his name was the primary on the mortgage, and because he had spent 3 weekends refinishing the floors and 2 more rebuilding the back fence. And the house had his work in its bones in a way that felt like a kind of ownership the paperwork only confirmed. He refinished the kitchen himself over a long weekend in October. New countertops, updated cabinet hardware, the backsplash he had been planning for 2 years. He did it alone, with a playlist and a precise sequence. And when it was done, he stood in the kitchen and made a cup of coffee and set it on the new counter and looked at it. He thought about a cup of coffee going cold on the counter behind Diane while she talked. He thought about what he had noticed in that moment and what he had filed away. He drank his coffee while it was still hot. Vivian came by to see the renovation in November. She stood in the kitchen and looked at the backsplash and the countertops and said, "You did this yourself, over a weekend." She looked at him the way she sometimes looked at him when she was deciding whether to say something. She didn't know what she was standing on, she said. "That's not your fault. It's not even really hers. Some people don't look down until the floor is already gone." Terrence considered that. "I know," he said. "How are you?" He thought about it honestly, the way she always expected him to answer questions. "Clearer," he said. "Like a routing system after you've stripped out the bad assumptions." Vivian nodded. She sat at the table. He made 2 cups of coffee from the machine he had wired into the kitchen circuit himself, a long time ago, in a different version of the room. He set one in front of her, and she wrapped both hands around it, and they sat in the reconfigured kitchen and talked about the cold chain client and the new referral, and what the next quarter looked like. The conversation about Diane lasted exactly as long as it needed to, which was not very long. Spice Consumer Group began showing the stress fractures in the 14th month. 2 of their retail partners publicly reduced their shelf space allocation. A trade publication, the same one that had run the enthusiastic profile, ran a follow-up piece with the phrase "growth stage turbulence" in the headline, which was the polite version of what Terrence would have called it in a report. The Series B investors requested a board meeting. 3 senior employees left inside a 6-week window. The company did not collapse in one event. It contracted. It shed weight in the way over-leveraged structures do. Not a crash, a slow reduction. Each layer of pretension falling away until what remained was much smaller than the narrative had promised. Garrett Spice sold the flagship product line to a competitor in month 17. The headquarters lease was renegotiated. The warehouse that had been staged for the trade publication Photograph was vacated. Terrence knew these things because they were in the trade press, and the trade press was part of his professional landscape, and he read it the way he read everything, not to find something specific, just to understand what the system was doing. He was not watching for Diane's name. He was watching because watching was how he worked. He had filed Spice Consumer Group in the folder marked Do Nothing. He had not opened that folder. She called the first time on a Thursday in month 18. He was in the middle of a client call. He let it go to voicemail. He finished the client call. He looked at the voicemail notification for a moment. The name on the screen was the name he had entered into the phone 6 years ago with a small icon next to it that he had not changed, and now looked like something from a different version of his own life. He did not listen to the voicemail. He set the phone face down on the desk and went back to work. She called 4 more times that week. He let each one go. On the 5th call he picked up by accident. His hand was full. He grabbed the phone without looking, and for a moment they were both on the line in a silence that lasted exactly 2 seconds before he said, "I can't talk right now," and ended the call. He set the phone down and did not move for a moment, the way you stand still after nearly stepping on something. She texted. He read them. He did not respond. The first said, "I know I don't have any right to call. I just need to talk to you." The second said, "Please." He thought about those 2 messages the way he thought about any communication that required a decision. Not emotionally, but structurally. What does this mean? What does responding accomplish? What does the system look like in 6 months, depending on which path is taken? He thought about the kitchen table, and the rehearsed composure, and the cold coffee. He thought about a different level. Terrence and the hand moving to indicate the house, the life, all of it. He thought about a man in a staged warehouse in clothes, selected for a photograph. He thought about what she was actually asking for. Not what the words said, what the underlying need was. He had spent 11 years in logistics. He knew how to read demand signals. She was not calling because she had decided she was wrong. She was calling because the thing she had traded toward had stopped delivering what she had expected it to deliver, and she was searching her inventory for an alternative. He was not an alternative. He was not a contingency. He was not a system she could route back through when the preferred route failed. He put the phone in a drawer and left it there until morning. The calls came in patterns after that. 3 in a day, then nothing for a week, then a cluster of 6. He counted them, not deliberately, but the way a person counts something that keeps arriving, because the count is information, and he was a person who paid attention to information. By the 8th week, he had a clear picture of the pattern, and the pattern told him what he already knew, without him needing to answer a single call to verify it. He called Vivian on a Tuesday afternoon, not about the calls, but about a new client referral she had mentioned. At the end of the conversation, she said, "How many times has she called now?" He told her. Vivian was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing," he said. Another pause. "That's the right answer." "I know," he said. "It's still hard," she said. He considered it. "Some of it is," he said. "Not the part about not answering. That part is clear. The hard part is just..." He stopped. "The hard part is knowing it didn't have to be this." Vivian said nothing for a moment. Then, "No, it didn't." A pause. "But it is what it is. And you built what you built anyway." He let that. "I'll send you the new contact's information," she said. "Thanks, Vivian." She hung up. He sat at his desk for a moment. Then he picked up the notepad. He looked at the week ahead. He picked up the pen. By the 200th call, he had been asleep for 3 hours. His phone was face down on the kitchen counter, next to a cup of coffee he had made before he went to bed and forgotten to drink. He would see the missed call in the morning, add it to the count, and go back to his notepad and the week ahead. He had a cold chain client presentation on Thursday. A new routing system to finish before Monday, a 4th employee starting in 2 weeks, whose hire had taken him 3 months of careful evaluation, because that was how long it took to know whether someone's work was actually what it appeared to be. He had learned that lesson the long way, and he did not intend to learn it twice. He had work to do. He had always had work to do. The difference now was that the work was entirely his. On a Sunday morning in February, 22 months after Diane had sat across from him at the kitchen table, Terrence Cole sat in the same chair with a cup of coffee and the yellow notepad, and did his load assessment for the week ahead. The kitchen was different now. New countertops. The backsplash he had put in over that October weekend, a small plant on the windowsill that Vivian had brought over when she came to see the renovation, a succulent in a terracotta pot. No card, just the plant, left on the counter where the cold coffee used to sit. He watered it on Thursdays. It was doing well. He wrote out the week. 3 client check-ins. 1 proposal due. A routing system review that would take most of Thursday. A call with a distribution company in the Eastern Valley that Vivian had connected him to, who needed exactly the kind of system redesign that CPL had now done 7 times and could do in its sleep. He looked at the list for a moment. Then he looked at the kitchen, at the countertops and the backsplash, and the plant on the sill and the morning light coming through the window he had reframed himself on a Saturday 4 years ago, when the old frame had started to let the cold in. He thought about invisible work, about the 11 years of systems that functioned so well, nobody thought about them. He thought about how long it takes for the value of invisible work to become visible, and how that timeline is not a problem with the work. It is the nature of load-bearing things. They hold up quietly until someone tries to remove them, and then everyone can see exactly what they were doing. He finished the coffee. He flipped to a new page. He wrote the first item of the week. He kept going. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.